Turn off the sound, if it annoys you. Another view of nirvana. 75 Gunabhadra translates Purvakoti in Mahamedi's question as Penchi, boundary/limit of the beginning, but in his answer, he translates it as Wupayan, without limit/boundary. Both are standard readings of this term, which refers to what came before samsara, before life and death, while Buddhakoti, ultimate reality, refers to what comes after nirvana. Essentially, they refer to the same thing. See section Lskse and my note there too. 76 Gunabhadra expands this into 6 lines. I followed Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit. 77 Gunabhadra has this is a Buddha's enlightenment for the last line, which I've transposed to the first line. Otherwise, I followed Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit for this verse. The Buddha is referring to the Tathagatagarbha here, which is the alaya vijnana transformed and thus unpolluted. The Buddha has more to say about this relationship between the Tathagatagarbha and the alaya vijnana in the next section. 78 Section Lskse. Mahamedi continues his inquiry into the nature of Buddhas. If all dharmas are transient, would this not also include those dharmas upon which Buddhahood is based? And if so, are Buddhas themselves not also momentary? The Buddha's teaching in this and other Mahayana Sutras is that dharmas are not momentary because they do not exist in the first place. But this is only understood by someone at the 8th stage of the bodhisattva path, someone who has attained the forbearance of non-arising. 79 The Sanskrit is Kshanabhanga, momentary breakable. Impermanence is among the earliest teachings of the Buddha. 80 The 5 skandhas, form, sensation, perception, memory, and consciousness, are sometimes called grasping because they represent the domains in which a self is established, or at least conjured. 81 Uncreated, or unconditioned, dharmas include space, cessation, and nirvana. 82 Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit all have 5 forms of sensory consciousness. Either version would be correct here, as it is only the 8th form of consciousness that transmigrates, which it does in the form of fundamental ignorance. 83 These refer to the 5 states of affliction, 4 of which are lumped together here: views, attachments to desire, attachments to form, attachments to formlessness, and fundamental ignorance, which is separated from the rest here, as it is said to be responsible for transmigration. 84 Section Lskse. This section does not so much explain the previous section as it does its last sentence. The deeper meaning of the Buddha's teaching of momentariness is no momentariness. The order of this and the next section was apparently confused at an early date, as Gunabhadra, Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit all have the next section before this one. However, such an arrangement is clearly mistaken, and I have reverted to what I assume was the original order. There are also quite a few lines in this section that are handled differently by Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit. I have only indicated the more significant differences. 85 Created things refer to Samskrita dharmas, as opposed to the Asamskrita, uncreated, dharmas of space, cessation, and nirvana. 86 This verse, and also the last 2 lines of the previous verse, outline the view of transmigration as the rebirth of ignorance. 87 Characteristic of the 3rd, Abhasvara, heaven in the 2nd meditation in the realm of form. 88 Referring to the view that affliction is enlightenment, samsara is nirvana. 89 For the last 2 lines, Bodhiruchi has, the forms that are seen are devoid of the 4 elements / how can the 4 elements create them? Shikshananda has, the elements have no real existence / why say they can create them? Suzuki translates the Sanskrit, realities are characterized with unreality / how can they be causal agencies? 90 Section Lskse. As this sutra approaches its conclusion, the practices known as the 6 paramithas are also reviewed in the light of its unique teaching. The 6 paramithas include charity, morality, forbearance, vigor, meditation, and wisdom. The word paramitha is often interpreted as the means for reaching the other shore, with this shore being that of samsara and the other shore being nirvana. 91 Bodhiruchi and Shikshananda ad, and how are they carried out? 92 One kind for ordinary people, one kind for shravakas and pratyeka-buddhas, and one kind for bodhisattvas. 93 Brahma was regarded as the supreme being and creator of the universe by Brahmans, and his heavens, as many as 18 according to some accounts, make up what Buddhists call the realm of form. 94 Every translation handles this clause differently. As elsewhere, I followed Gunabhadra, who has a Buddha's Dharma body in mind. 95 Section 6. Mahamedi poses a final series of questions concerning the nature of Buddhas and Buddhahood. Much like those concerning the metaphor of the sand of the Ganges, the Buddha's answers are meant to reveal the deeper meaning concerning what on the surface appear to be contradictions. 96 The sentence follows from the previous one and asks how is it that those who seek nirvana, arhats, are assured of Buddhahood. I have followed Shikshananda in this case, as the wording is unclear in Gunabhadra, while Bodhiruchi has Buddhas not entering nirvana rather than arhats not entering nirvana. Suzuki has something quite different. How can all beings attain Tathagatahood without realizing the truths of parinirvana? 97 Vajrapani is the name of one of the three protective deities of every Buddha. As his name indicates, he is usually depicted wielding a vajra, or thunderbolt. 98 Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit all have variations of why say the ultimate beginning is not knowable yet speak of entering nirvana. In what follows, the Buddha says the ultimate beginning cannot be known because the past and future are illusions and because it is merely another fabrication. 99 This refers to the attempt by Mara and his demonic host to distract Shakyamuni prior to his attainment of enlightenment. 100 Sinkamanavika accused the Buddha of being the father of her unborn child, which turned out to be nothing but rags tied around her stomach. Sundari also made false accusations against the Buddha. Some texts say for sexual impropriety, others say that she killed her own daughter, buried the body where the Buddha was staying, and accused the Buddha of the murder. 101 This refers to an occasion when the residents of a village where the Buddha was begging refused to give him any food. 102 The term Dharmata Buddha, as the Buddha says later in this section, refers to a real Buddha, or what would eventually be called a Buddha's Dharma body. 103 The seventh consciousness is self-consciousness. 104 It is only the habit energy of repository consciousness that ceases, not the eighth consciousness itself, which, once purified, is referred to as the Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhas, and thus the source of Buddha knowledge. 105 The Sanskrit for this expression is purvadharmastitata. 106 As it did earlier in this chapter, these refer to the 5 states of affliction, wrong views, attachments to desire, attachments to form, attachments to formlessness, and fundamental ignorance. 107 There are different lists for the 2 afflictions, kleshas. Most likely meant are afflictions arising from projection and those inherent in the 8 forms of consciousness. 108 Demons cannot disturb, nor Vajrapani protect, those who understand what is real. 109 They necessarily limit their explanations of the Dharma to things people can see, using them as metaphors for what they cannot see. But they do not speak of their own understanding because they are apparitions and have no experience or realization of their own. 110 Bodhiruchi, Shikshananda, and the Sanskrit have 6 forms of consciousness. Obviously, there developed a difference of opinion as to whether or not the will, or self-consciousness, ceases along with conceptual and sensory consciousness at death. In the Lankavatara, the Buddha says only the repository consciousness continues into the next life. Hence, Gunabhadra's version alone is consistent with the text. 111 The Sanskrit has Samdhyabhashya, twilight teaching, which is a mistake for Samdhabhasya, esoteric teaching. Gunabhadra and Bodhiruchi have Yinfu, covered, while Shikshananda has Miyi, secret. The meaning of this is a subject of much debate. Which is the real teaching? Judging from what the Buddha says in the following verses as well as elsewhere in the Sutra, He is concerned that if he presented his real teaching to such people, it would either be misunderstood or it would terrify them. Hence, he keeps it covered up and presents something more attractive. Then again, at the end of section LXC, he asks why people don't understand the deeper meaning of his words. 112 The four states of affliction include views and attachments in the realms of desire, form, and formlessness. They are referred to as the five states when they include fundamental ignorance. 113 Section XC. This section on cultivating a vegetarian diet follows from the foregoing and is not a haphazard addition. It is important to know how to live in this world of illusions. And the practice of avoiding the eating of meat became part of the bodhisattva path advocated by Mahayana Buddhism. Thus, some commentators also view this section as a critique of the practices of Hinayana Buddhists, namely, the shravakas and pratyeka-buddhas, who excused their eating of meat by claiming it was not proscribed by the precepts. Bodhiruchi's translation of the prose part of this section is 7 times as long, while Shikshananda's is 3 times as long, suggesting that this issue was of more than passing concern. 114 Wine and onions are not mentioned again in the prose section. I imagine this is because they were already listed among the things prohibited by the precepts that lay and monastic Buddhists agreed to abide by. Eating meat, however, was not prohibited, although killing was. The reason for the proscription regarding onions and their kin was that they were considered aphrodisiacs. To this first verse, Gunabhadra adds 2 lines, "May the Peerless One pity us," with an explanation. I followed Bodhiruchi and Shikshananda, neither of whom includes this. 115 Most likely referring to the unburied corpses of the poor. 116 You never know when you're eating a human. 117 Chandalas were members of a despised caste associated with the disposal of corpses. Dambas were also outcasts and associated with the cremation of corpses. 118 The Buddha encouraged such associations so that his followers would eat and drink as little as possible. 119 This story appears in a number of variants in early Indian texts. Saudasa was the son of Sudasa and a lioness. Hence, he was called Singha, the lion. 120 It was the contention of some shravakas that as long as they didn't request, seek, or think about meat, they could eat it. 121 Shikshananda's translation of the poems agrees with that of Gunabhadra, while that of Bodhiruchi sometimes does but often does not. The Sanskrit includes a number of verses that are not present in any of the Chinese versions. 122 The proscription in this case concerns the use of sesame oil as an insecticide. 123 Not only is self-mortification counterproductive to enlightenment, killing insects in the process cancels any merit gained from such a practice. 124 This is one of the 8 hot hells. The Sanskrit is rorava, meaning to lament or scream. 125 This terminology, which also appears in the penultimate paragraph of the prose section, refers to the series of excuses some shravakas used for eating meat. 126 Chandalas were one of many despised castes in India. Among their professions was the disposal of corpses. Dambas were another despised caste whose professions included the cremation of corpses. 127 The appearance of Rakshasas here is ironic, considering they were the inhabitants of Lanka. Gunabhadra spreads this out over 6 lines. 128 The Angulimala Sutra was translated into Chinese by Gunabhadra, the translator of the sutra, around AD 440. Not to be confused with the Angulimala Sutta of the Pali Canon, the focus of this Mahayana text is on the Tathagatagarbha, or true self. 129 The wording here refers to the practice of reporting violations of the precepts as to what one has seen, heard, or suspected regarding others and oneself. The Buddha's point is that such people are attached to their projection of their newfound purity. Lankavatara Mantra 130. The Buddha then told Mahamati, in order to protect the sutra, Buddhas of the past, the future, and the present proclaim the Lankavatara mantra. You should memorize what I, too, proclaim. The mantra goes. Tute vut vut pat pat cat cat amali amali vimal nim nim heim vami kale at mat vat tute janet sput cat latte pat dime kale pace bond he ans mans tudere patar arc sark kicker dime heim tu do are you foo svaha. Mahamati, if a good son or daughter memorizes and recites and explains this dharani to others, no human or non-human or evil spirit will trouble them. And should misfortune occur, if someone recites this mantra for them 108 times, the offending spirit will leave at once. Mahamati, I will teach you another mantra. Padme Padmatave hein si u kul fulfula fula yul gula pale pala muns kinda binda banye mard pram arde dinakir svaha. Mahamati, if a good son or daughter memorizes and recites and explains this dharani to others, no deva, or naga or yaksha or human or non-human or evil spirit will trouble them. I also teach this mantra to keep rakshasas away. Whoever memorizes these mantras, memorizes every word of the Lankavatara Sutra. This marks the end of the Lankavatara Sutra. 130 This mantra, or dharani, is not present in Gunabhadra's text. I based my rendering on Shikshananda's Chinese transcription and the Sanskrit.